Hello, this is Nature Connects. I'm James Miller, I'm your host. Thank you so much for being with us today, and a special welcome to those of you who are joining us from Connecticut. Merriam-Webster defines resilience as the ability to recover from or adjust easily to misfortune or change. We commonly hear this applied to individuals, sports teams, political campaigns, financial markets, and much more. It's the concept of community resilience, though, that's the focus for our presenters today. In 2007, one of our guests, the Nature Conservancy in Connecticut's Director of Science, Dr. Adam Welchel, began leading climate preparedness workshops in Connecticut coastal communities. What started as with a relatively narrow focus in Waterford, East Lyme, Old Lyme, and Stonington evolved over the years into a holistic community resilience building framework. Community resilience building brings together a wide range of stakeholders to identify their communities or even academic institutions' vulnerabilities and strengths in the face of climate change and other challenges. It also provides a context for them to identify ways to address some of the vulnerabilities. It wasn't just the scope of the approach that expanded, though, it was also the geography. Today, community resilience building is at the heart of Massachusetts' groundbreaking Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program, or MVP. To date, more than 80% of Massachusetts' 351 municipalities have participated in MVP. They're using community resilience building to identify social, environmental, and infrastructure strengths and weaknesses in the face of climate change and create specific action plans to move forward. For MVP, Adam and today's second guest, TNC in Massachusetts, Sarah Burns, have helped train more than 500 individuals called service providers. Adam and Sarah have also directly facilitated many MVP participants' community resilience building explorations themselves. A little bit more about our presenters. Sarah Burns, from whom you'll hear first, is a water resource scientist with the Nature Conservancy in Massachusetts. Sarah works with a range of partners and technical experts to plan, fund, and construct nature-based solutions to improve water quality, reconnect aquatic ecosystems, and reduce natural hazard impacts. Sarah holds an MS in environmental science from Indiana University. Before joining TNC, she planned emergency tree work around power lines in Chicago and managed an organic vegetable farm in Michigan. Dr. Adam Welchel is the Director of Science for the Nature Conservancy in Connecticut. Adam is an author, facilitator, and communicator called upon to assist diverse groups from around the world with team building, strategic planning, and community building. His work has touched down in the United States, China, Europe, Southeast Asia, the Caribbean, and Africa. Adam recently served as the lead facilitator on the Puerto Rico Climate Adaptation Plan and is a lead author for the third U.S. National Climate Assessment. As mentioned, Adam is the founder of Community Resilience Building, which has now helped more than 400 municipalities and academic institutions across 9 states. Just some quick webinar housekeeping notes. Attendees are muted. Sarah and Adam are going to present for 20 to 25 minutes, and after that, we'll take your questions. For the Q&A session, we're also going to be joined by Steve Long, who is the Government Relations Director for the Nature Conservancy in Massachusetts. And I'll tell you a little bit more about Steve when we get to that part of the program. Please share your questions using the Q&A function on the screen. If you have any technical challenges with today's presentation, please let us know through the webinar chat, and we'll do everything we can to help. Final note, to get the best possible view, we recommend that you go to the top center of your screen. There's a pull-down menu there where you can choose Fit to Window. And so with that, thanks again, everyone, so much for being here. I'm going to hand it off to Sarah Burns. Hello and welcome, Sarah.
Hi, James. Thanks for that great introduction, and thanks everyone for joining us today. Next slide, please. So I'm going to lay some groundwork about climate resilience and natural hazards to kick us off. Natural hazards are events like floods, droughts, and storms that can cause damage to the built environment and to natural ecosystems. These natural hazards have occurred throughout time, and our cities and infrastructure and ecosystems have been designed and evolved to more or less withstand or at least quickly recover from historic natural hazard events. When we're talking about climate resilience, what we're talking about is adapting our lives and environment and helping our ecosystems adapt to increasing frequency and intensity of natural hazards as they are changed by climate change. This type of climate resilience planning requires special planning and forecasting rather than simply relying on previous experiences as a planning benchmark. Climate resilience planning also requires collaboration with minority and disenfranchised communities that are disproportionately exposed to these hazards. Next slide, please. So around the world, the Nature Conservancy uses a toolkit we call nature-based solutions to help people and nature prepare for the impacts of climate change. So nature-based solutions are projects that protect existing resources like intact forests, restore degraded ecosystems like wetlands, for example, and or manage the hazards associated with development. So if you've ever been in a really built out city during a rain event, you might notice really flashy, deep floodwaters, and nature-based solutions can help manage those impacts as well. Nature-based solutions can be designed to optimize a number of outcomes, including protecting public health and clean water, increasing natural hazard resilience, and sequestering carbon. These projects are often thought of as providing multiple benefits or more bang for the buck because in many cases they can be designed to provide more than one of these outcomes. If you're interested in learning more about carbon sequestration, you should tune in to, I think it's next week's Nature Connects webinar, where Laura Marks from the Massachusetts chapter of the Nature Conservancy is going to talk a lot more about our work on sequestering carbon. So stay tuned for that. Next slide, please. So I want to share one example here of a type of nature-based solution. This is cranberry bog restoration. Cranberry bog restoration is really growing in Massachusetts. The Nature Conservancy here in Massachusetts was a partner in the very first cranberry bog restoration in the state. And we are still playing a role, albeit a somewhat minor role, with the state's Division of Ecological Restoration, which recently received $15 million in grant funding to work on restoring 1,000 acres of cranberry bog in Massachusetts. This will be the largest wetland restoration effort in Massachusetts to date, and we're really excited about it. These restoration projects can help slow and store floodwaters, restore habitat and biodiversity, and help farmers who might want an exit plan from the cranberry farming industry as prices for Massachusetts cranberries have been declining over the years. These restoration projects in many cases are also managed as recreational amenities, drawing people who want to hike and bird and experience these resources. The Massachusetts chapter of the Nature Conservancy is also working with a group of partners in Barnstable, Massachusetts to look at how cranberry bog restoration in Barnstable might help address some nutrient pollution on Cape Cod, but that is definitely another story. Next slide. Another example of nature-based solutions can be found in Holyoke, Massachusetts. Over the past few years, Holyoke has worked very proactively to engage citizens, including their Puerto Rican community, around the flood and heat impacts associated with impervious surfaces, or basically developed and paved areas. The city is working with these communities to understand both the impacts of the heat and flooding associated with these paved areas, and also working to interview families who came to Holyoke after Hurricane Maria to understand the impact that that natural hazard had on the citizens of Holyoke now. The Nature Conservancy here in Massachusetts is also working with Holyoke through the MVP program, the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program, to do targeted community engagement and outreach with these citizens in the most impacted areas of Holyoke to really help round out the picture of the impacts of the impervious cover and the flooding and the heat impacts that are associated with that, and to start framing out potential nature-based solutions that can manage the hazards associated with those impacts. So we're really excited to be working with Holyoke. Next slide, please. Oh, Liz, I'm sorry. Advance a couple more times. We don't need to have it animate. Sorry, everyone. Okay, that's great. So this slide, now that we've set some groundwork for climate resilience and nature-based solutions, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program. And this slide just gives some context of the statewide climate work that's been happening in Massachusetts starting in about 2008. The state government has been working hard to both adapt to the impacts of climate change and to mitigate emissions so that we can prevent some of the more extreme potential outcomes of unchecked greenhouse gas emissions. James mentioned this already, but we're lucky to have Steve Long joining us in the Q&A today. So if you have policy questions, we'll definitely have Steve jump in on those. I also want to point out on this slide, you can see starting in about 2015 that Massachusetts also experienced a series of pretty severe weather events, including a series of 3 coastal storms in 2018, during which we recorded the highest tide on record in Massachusetts. So in between the drought of 2016 and those coastal storms in 2018, the state launched the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program, or MVP. Next slide, please. The Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness, or MVP program, is a state and local partnership through grant funding to build resiliency to climate change. And this program exists in 2 stages. The first is planning grant and certification. This process is completely centered around the community resilience building approach. And Adam is going to talk with you more about that in just a few minutes. But at the end of that certification process, the municipalities who participate with the community members who join the process have developed a prioritized set of actions to increase their resilience to climate change. And once that plan is finalized and the municipalities are certified, they're eligible to apply for action grants, which is grant funding for implementation of the projects that result from this planning report. James mentioned this already, but Adam and I worked to help the state train about 500 service providers in how to facilitate the planning grant workshops, and we helped provide materials and trainings for the service providers to convey the role for nature-based solutions in this climate resilience planning process. I also want to just mention here that the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program has a few core principles that really guide the grant funding, especially funding for implementation. And among those core principles are that nature-based solutions are prioritized for funding because of their multiple benefits, and meaningful engagement of environmental justice communities, both in understanding the impacts to them and having them be part of developing solutions, is also prioritized for funding. So as this program has grown over the last few years, these core principles are being more and more established in the program. Next slide, please. So here's the update on progress in Massachusetts. As James mentioned already, 82% of the municipalities in Massachusetts have enrolled in the MVP program. And since the very first planning workshops were held in 2017, the state has awarded $28 million for implementation. And $16 million of that funding has gone towards implementation of nature-based solutions. For those of you on the webinar who live in Massachusetts, if you're curious, you can go online and determine the status of your municipality in the program. And regardless of whether they haven't participated yet or if they've already received funding for Action Grant implementation, there should be someone in town you can reach out to and get a little involved in the process if you're interested. So with that overview, now I'm going to turn it over to Adam, and he's going to talk about the Community Resilience Building Program, which, as you can see, has literally swept across Massachusetts. So thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name's Adam. It's wonderful, thrilled to be here with you today and with some of my favorite TNC colleagues, that being James, Sarah, and Steve. Can't think of a stronger group to provide you with a great webinar today. So thanks so much for having us. So I want to talk to you about the community resilience building process. And this is really a way to help advance our mission and live up to the vision as a Nature Conservancy, and at the same time, as Sarah mentioned, to serve as a catalyst to change people's lives and the environment for the better as we adapt to climate change and extreme weather. The Community Resilience Building Process, or simply the CRB, is now trusted by over 400 communities across 9 states. And we're going to be focusing in on where it all originated: Connecticut, Mass, Rhode Island, and New York in the Hudson River Valley. And we'll talk a little bit about that. To date, we've had over 12,000 individuals participate in our workshops, and that is roughly about 84,000 hours invested in building resilient communities. So think about that. It's an amazing tribute to the process, but more importantly, to those individuals that have committed to making positive changes in the face of climate change. The CRB process is what we call an anywhere at any scale approach. It's flexible, it's tailorable, which makes it highly attractive for folks. You can use it in small communities, large communities, inland, coastal, rural, urban, and yes, disadvantaged communities as well as wealthy. It's a unique community-driven process that meets the communities where they are. They define what their top hazards are, as Sarah defined it, whether it's hurricanes, heat, flooding, sea level rise, wildfires, you name it. It's really up to them to create. It also provides a workbench to integrate other really critical topics such as health, sustainability, equity, as well as infectious diseases and pandemics, which is highly apropos given our current circumstances. At the end of the day, the final product of a CRB workshop is a community-based action plan, something that is of the community and for the community, and they know the origin story, and they can more effectively collaborate and move forward with solutions to climate and extreme weather. It's very much a people-centric process. It's all about getting those that make decisions and those that are impacted by decisions that are made for them. So we really focus in on the community here, pulling in the chief elected officials, municipal staff, economic and community development, emergency management, land trusts. Imagine that. Faith-based civic organizations, neighborhood associations, chamber of commerce. It's really a whole community, all voices kind of approach. And it provides an opportunity to both contribute and be heard. And of course, the secret sauce is the relationships and the trusts that are built around solutions and moving forward. So it's very much of the community and for the community. There's some structure to it. There's steps before, during, and after a workshop that need to be adhered to, but there's lots of flexibility in between. We focus in on 3 principal components of municipalities, those being infrastructure, societal, and environmental. Typically what we found is the conversation around adapting to climate usually begins and ends with infrastructure, maybe a little societal needs and strengths built in, but oftentimes the environment is left out of the conversation. And so the CRB, being the Nature Conservancy, provides a way to ensure that the environment and societal challenges and solutions are built in and systemically integrated into that final action plan. It gives equal weight to the environment, which really, again, speaks to our mission and our vision of MBS and adapting to climate. Everything is served up for free. You can get the workbook, the invitation letter, the facilitator's agenda. Everything is provided out there for communities to pick up and run with this and really get to an action plan in a relatively short period of time. The workshops typically last about 6 hours to 8 hours, and in a very short order of time, it's very efficient and very effective. And we have had some communities that have just gone on the website, downloaded the information and done their own workshops, and we're thrilled to pieces that people are actually out there doing this without taking the self-direction to get it done. We mentioned that, of course, this is highly effective at the municipal or academic institution level. But what we've seen in Massachusetts with the MVP program is that so many municipalities have gone through the same process. They can compare apples to apples. And what that generates is this regional thinking. Every single municipality on Cape Cod, including Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard, has gone through the CRB process. Every single municipality in the Parker and the Ipswich watershed, for example, in north coastal areas of Mass, have gone through the CRB process. And what this generates is comprehensive and catalytic climate solutions at the local and regional scales, whether it's geographic, political, watershed, sewershed, you name it. It enables a comparison and an integration towards more regional solutions, which really speaks to what we're ultimately trying to do here. It also puts the Nature Conservancy into rather unique and diverse kind of contexts and adds value to what we can bring to the table. As happenstance would have it, we did a workshop in January with the Tufts Health Science Center in Chinatown in downtown Boston. We brought Tufts together, but we required that Climate Ready Boston be there as well so that we can integrate the city with the Health Science Center to create diverse collaborations that strengthen partnerships around solutions. Tufts needed to know how they fit in the city's plan for climate resilience. And the city needed to recognize that Tufts can be a huge partner in this. And that was one of the direct outcomes of our CRB workshop, which really speaks to the uniqueness and the diversity of adding value to TNC, who we are and where we're headed. Here's a quick snapshot of the locations that we've had the privilege of working, either workshops or training with the CRB. You can start to see a cluster here in the Northeast, but I wanted to point out we've had the privilege of working in Minneapolis and Milwaukee and a few other locations down in Virginia. But let's focus in on our immediate region here. Here you go. Every single little orange star represents a municipality that has gone through and benefited from the CRB process. And obviously you can see quite a few in Massachusetts via the MVP program. We've leveraged that in the great state of Rhode Island through the Municipal Resilience Program. So we've already been able to take the successes of the MVP in Mass and translate that into successes on the ground and in these workshops down in Rhode Island. And it speaks to amazing partnership between staff in Connecticut, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and yes, in New York as well, where we've had the privilege of working with over 40 municipalities in the Hudson River Valley area. So it speaks to, an expansion, a growth, but more importantly, I think it speaks to the willingness and the commitment and the reality of those on the front lines in municipalities to really start moving on climate. And the CRB has provided them with that pathway and the mechanism to do so. Now, Nature Conservancy, we have big hopes and big aspirations, and we're looking for funding to expand the CRB process beyond the initial 400 here to 1,000 communities in the next 3 years. And we have serious interest immediately with not only completing the great work in Rhode Island, but also to expand into places like New Hampshire and down to the south and west in Pennsylvania and Maryland, where people have heard about the great work in the MVP program and the MRP program in Rhode Island and really want to replicate that. So we're looking for funding support there to make that happen. And that's pretty much what I wanted to say. And with that, I'll turn it back to you, James, and look forward to any questions that people might have.
Thanks, Adam and Sarah. Very much appreciated. And so as we get started with the Q&A segment of today's program, we're going to be joined by Steve Long. And Adam, Sarah, Steve, all of you can please go ahead and jump on screen now. And Steve is the Government Relations Director for the Nature Conservancy in Massachusetts. In that role, Steve delivers solutions to the challenges of tackling climate change and conserving natural resources by influencing public policy and securing funding. He has led advocacy campaigns in Massachusetts by collaborating with diverse stakeholders to enable investment of billions of dollars and prioritize nature-based solutions. Steve's been with TNC since 2007. He received his BA in political science from Ithaca College and an MA in political science and public policy from Rutgers University. And hello, Steve. I think you're muted.
I am. Hi, James.
Hi.
Nice to see you.
Likewise. Folks, please enter your questions. We're already getting several, and we'll just roll right into this. Just to kind of start, Adam, with you, I've heard you say about community resilience building that the process isn't magical, but the outcomes can be. Can you say a little bit more about that? I mean, what do you mean? Yeah,
so if you look at the actual steps, and again, you can get the guidebook through the communityresiliencebuilding.org website. It's relatively straightforward adaptive planning. There are some tricks of the trade. I came up as a community ecologist, and I made a shift about 14 years ago to a community psychologist and really recognized that it really is about single species management and understanding how people work. And so there's some tricks of the trade built into the facilitating these workshops, but it's relatively straightforward adaptive management kind of planning. But what happens, and I mentioned this, is by providing everybody with an opportunity to contribute and be heard, ultimately what you end up with is relationships and trust. And to have that is super magical. And so while we collect a lot of information and generate an operational and competent and comprehensive report full of great actions that the community can take, what we're really trying to do is create relationships and trust. And that's the magical part that we end up, and that's the longevity, that's the lasting piece that we're really trying to achieve with these CRB workshops.
Thank you, Adam. Sarah, jump over to you for a second, and please also for Adam, Sarah, and Steve, if you think a question is best sent to someone else, feel free to do so. Sarah, there's a tendency when we talk about this to focus on the vulnerabilities aspect of it, but this also, CRB and MVP also look at strengths and try to build on strengths. Could you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. I think this actually might contribute to part of magic sauce that Adam was just talking about as well. After many, many workshops, you hear the participants say like, wow, I didn't know you were doing that. Or like, I didn't know we had such a good program for X. So by focusing on strengths as well as vulnerabilities, you call attention to where things are already working in the municipality and things that are working well for them. And you encourage them to I often write like, keep up the good work and to continue funding their strengths and valuing them so that they don't lose any resilience that they already have.
And if I may, that often includes land protection and conservation work that they've done, those riparian zones that they haven't built in, and just it surfaces the importance of the environment as a strength.
Great.
And this is Steve. If I can add, I just think of one community in which they identified a strength of having people who've lived there for 20, 30, and 40 years who all know each other and are tightly bound to each other and can provide assistance when an emergency happens, especially when they think about vulnerable populations like the elderly.
Right. Yeah, that's a great example, Steve. Thank you. And Steve, while we're talking, a question for you about, and I think this is a policy question, but also more than a policy question. Sarah and Adam both addressed it a little bit, but how do we ensure that program, the MVP specifically, but a program like MVP is inclusive at the community level?
That's a good question. Well, I think it must be near lunchtime because both Adam and Sarah have referenced secret sauce. And so I'm going to talk about a recipe for success in policy. So you really need law, funding, and then program and technical support at the agency level. And if you look at the MVP law, it does require the agencies to develop and implement an outreach and education program about climate change and its effects on low-income, environmental justice, and urban communities to increase participation. So it's right there in the law, clearly spelled out. The legislature also worked hard to provide funding for this program through the environmental bond in 2014 and 2018. And now the governor has proposed a new potential source of funding from a real estate transfer fee. So having funding is essential. And then looking at the two types of grants that MVP provides, planning and action grants, they both require the community to identify how the community will work proactively to involve vulnerable and environmental justice groups in the planning process. And the action grants can include engaging, educating, and empowering these underserved communities through outreach, education, and translation of materials. And there's some really great examples in Chelsea. There were multiple languages spoken. There was childcare provided, and there was even some grocery store gift cards provided to folks who had to miss hourly work. And the MVP website has some really great tutorials and webinars to provide technical assistance to the municipalities doing this program on how to do public engagement and best management practices.
Thank you, Steve. We're getting a lot of questions now, and so I'm kind of working through them. And Sarah, I think this one probably would go to you. How exactly do you restore a cranberry bog? Break down the walls between the bogs? What else? What does that entail?
Yeah, it's a really fascinating question. And we have some good examples up on the Division of Ecological Restoration website with some great pictures. So anyway, the answer, generally speaking, when farmers were converting natural wetlands into cranberry bogs, one of the things that they did every couple of years was add a layer of sand. And so you can imagine over the course of many years, those sand layers have really built up. So one of the key components of the work is getting that sand out of the way so that the natural hydrology or the fluctuating groundwater table can start to help rebuild a natural wetland. And many of the systems have dikes or small dams in them that need to be removed. And there's other details that are site specific, but really getting that sand out, letting the water do the work for you, and letting the water sort of fluctuate naturally is really a cornerstone of that kind of restoration work.
Adam, I think this one will go to you probably, and I think you might have touched on it. How much does it cost to have CRB in one's community?
Yeah, that can really vary. We've done a lot of pro bono workshops, especially at the beginning when we were trying to build up some recognition of the particular program. But it really got elevated with the MVP program. As Sarah pointed out, there's some significant dollars that are being directed to both the planning side as well as the action. And I can't understate the importance of that. So you get funded to generate the priorities, and then you take those priorities to the action side and get funded. The average cost per workshop in Mass, it can range from like $15,000 all the way up to over 100,000, depending on how deep and how extensive the process is and how much time is actually dedicated to engaging environmental justice communities and really sinking in and having a really good understanding of what their needs are and what their strengths are. A great example is the city of Worcester, the new Boston, maybe. But really the time and energy put in is funded accordingly via the MVP program. Now, in a lot of places, those funds aren't available, but the need is there. And that's why we're asking for funding to help advance this. But rough cost, average cost for a TNC would be about $12,000 per workshop. And that includes front, during, and post, with an actionable plan to go along with it and a community that's been built around resilience. So reasonable, very reasonable.
Adam, so a question we have here, there's several questions about funding coming in. One about the, is CRB funding provided by the states or federal funding? If I understand you, then most of the cost is actually borne by TNC, is that correct?
Well, it depends on where you're at. The MVP program, the funding, and Steve can talk to this. It's state dollars, taxpayer dollars that are being redirected to municipality. A state government saying, you municipalities are really important to us. We need you, and we want to elevate and raise you up. Therefore, we're going to fund the planning and fund the action. So TNC provided a lot of the training up front to make sure that the service providers knew how to implement a CRB workshop. That's why we're able to get to scale so quickly with that 287 municipalities in like 2 years, was we educated a cohort of facilitators on the process, and they were the actual consultants who were getting paid with the planning grants to work on behalf of the municipality. So, but it varies in a lot of places. Like in Connecticut, our partnership with Sustainable Connecticut, it's a pro bono situation currently, and that's really because it fits so well with our mission and our vision. But nothing's for free. We have a fantastic, unbelievable philanthropy staff in all 3 of our states, Connecticut, Mass, and Rhode Island, that work collaboratively and cooperatively to raise the funds necessary to allow us to do this great work. So we're always looking to leverage state, federal, local funds, but we're so privileged and thankful for the backstop that we have with our philanthropy team in our respective states. So the work continues where we're able to, but yeah.
If I could just add really quickly, the funding in Massachusetts is fairly stable. It comes through a bond authorization, and the advocacy behind continued funding is very strong. The Nature Conservancy and our partner Mass Audubon formed the Massachusetts Climate Change Adaptation Coalition that has over 50 member organizations. These are associations and organizations that represent broad swaths of engineers, architects, planners, business associations, and others who are very supportive of funding. And the governor and the speaker and the Senate president are very actively seeking additional sources of funding. One of the phrases I like using is, we want business to have some skin in the game. So we're seeking a real estate transfer fee that would really get the commercial real estate folks and others to support the CRB program and MVP, because there are so many beneficiaries of MVP. It's the community itself, the neighbors, the residents, but it's also the businesses and organizations that thrive in a community that benefit as well.
Steve, you mentioned the environmental bond. Could you, while we're here, also just kind of talk a little bit about the size and scope of the environmental bond program in Massachusetts?
Sure. The environmental bond is typically enacted into law every 5 years. And we like to think of the bond as a buffet table. It provides a wide range of authorizations from which the governor and the treasurer can borrow money. So every year, the governor engages in a capital planning process from which he walks along with his lunch tray and picks items off the buffet table that can be funded. So the last environmental bond was about $2.4 billion, and the funding for the MVP program has been in the tens of millions of dollars from the environmental bond for both the planning and the action grants. I think where the rubber is going to meet the road in the future is really the action grants, and that is going to require lots of capital funding to help communities identify and implement those nature-based solutions for their infrastructure, for the vulnerable populations, and to ensure that these plans become real and that it get implemented in the communities and at a larger scale too, across the communities, because we know that climate change doesn't stick to a municipal border. It really has to be bound together across municipal borders.
That's a great segue to actually two questions we've received. And Sarah, I think I'm going to head over your way for this one. Under MVP, do most planning grants lead to implementation grants?
Sorry, unmuted. You know, I don't actually know the solid numbers on that, but the action grant program they've had several rounds, and they've funded 10 million every time, and they have had, you know, 3-4 times the number of requests than they're able to fund. So I can't say exactly the rate, but the municipalities are made aware of the action grants. You know, when you do the planning grant workshop, you're saying, you're pointing towards, and you get to do stuff on the other end of this. So really be thoughtful about what you'd like to see done. And the reports do a great job of calling out like really top priority actions it's a relatively light lift to turn those priority actions into an action grant request. So we're seeing action grants being implemented across the state.
So we have several questions, and again, it segues very well from the conversation about action grants. We have several questions about nature-based solutions and examples. So I think I'll throw this out and let whomever wants to start take it first, but I suspect we might have a little conversation about it. But question, straightforward one is please give some specific examples of nature-based solutions. And you know, another one, a specific example of what implementation of a nature-based solution looks like. So can we talk a little bit more about that? Sarah, you're still muted.
How about now?
No, you're good. You're good. We can hear you now.
So it's a great question, and nature-based solutions is such a broad, inclusive toolkit that we could really have a long conversation about this. But I think you know, one way to think about this, especially in the MVP program, is to break it down by hazard type. And just talk about a couple of nature-based solutions projects that have been implemented in terms of getting funding to start down the road towards actual construction. So in the coastal setting, the city of Boston has just received an action grant in I believe it was the 2019 round, to do engineering and design for Moakley Park. Which is actually sort of at the, you know, the ocean side of the Emerald Necklace. It's a 60-acre park that already exists, that was built on fill and then a landfill, and then they put some sand on top, and there's rugby fields and soccer goals and things like that, but it floods quite frequently. So the city of Boston's been funded to design a park that has a gradual slope and vegetation growing in it, so that when coastal storms hit, the vegetation will slow and dampen the height of the waves and protect the community on the back end of that slope from coastal flooding. The park is also, they're trying to increase the tree canopy in the park to help citizens come to a place where they can cool during extreme heat events. You can already see that the park provides some cooling services, but they want to increase that with more trees. And they worked very closely with community members to understand how the people in the neighborhoods around the park in Dorchester and parts of Boston want to use the park. So they're building in basketball courts and other amenities that the neighbors will actually use, so that people will come outside and be cooled and interact with each other and be protected from coastal storms. So I think that that's a really exciting example of a coastal nature-based solution. There are a few communities that have received funding to build what we call green stormwater infrastructure, which is a management type of nature-based solution that's really focused on flooding that's driven by rain events. And those communities, what they do is they do an assessment of where they have a lot of flood events associated with lots of pavement, and they can build little like depressions and fill them with grasses and trees and plants and sands that drain really quickly, and they can manage the floodwaters through those kinds of practices. And if they include trees, oftentimes they get an added co-benefit of heat reduction. And actually, in the case of Franklin, Massachusetts, they're designing those projects to help with stormwater and also with drought, so getting water back into the water table. So that's a couple of examples of projects that are moving towards implementation in the program. I think the last thing I'll say is that the program also funds ordinance and bylaw review for each municipality to take a look at the laws they have on their books already and check to make sure that they're allowed to do nature-based solutions. So if there are minimum road widths from the 1940s, let's say, that are no longer really required for public safety, those can limit your ability to plant trees along a street. And so reviewing your bylaws to make sure that these practices are allowable is a key component of moving this work forward across the state. And that kind of review is also allowed through the program. And when I count nature-based solutions, I count that review as a nature-based solution as well.
Hey, James?
Yes.
You know, one of the things, a lot of the projects and the policy that Sarah just highlighted, I kind of, what's helped me kind of think about what's a nature-based solution or not in the context of preparing people in the environment for climate change is thinking about a resilient triple bottom line, where you have a project that is somehow reducing risk, enhancing, restoring, creating something that's amplifying the environment ecosystems, and then also providing a public amenity, right? So it's risk reduction, the environment, and somehow advantaging communities, whether it be a park or something along those lines. So kind of keeping those three kind of things in my mind helps me identify what NBS projects are. And I know Steve was about to say this, but I'll beat him to it. The Nature Conservancy has a wonderful website that we've created with partners called Naturally Resilient Communities. And it's the site is called nrcsolutions.org. And it is chock full of great NBS projects that will really get you in touch with what we're trying to do, how far we can go, and how this can be actually beneficial to our planet in a climate change world. And as Steve would call it, it is the
like Yelp for climate change. You enter the variables. What problem are you trying to solve? What geography are you looking at? What scale are you looking at? And how much money do you have? And you click in those variables and you get a whole host of case studies.
I love it. Yelp for climate change. And this is a great time to say that we will be sending out, after today's webinar, a follow-up email, and there's several resources that have been mentioned already, and we'll include some links and ways that you can follow up. And to editorialize for a second, I, as a former resident of South Boston and a current resident of Dorchester, I'm very familiar with Moakley, and I think Moakley Park has incredible potential. It really is, could be a showpiece for something for nature-based solutions because of where it's located, how visible it is, and and the landscape that you so well described, Sarah. So that's something I think would be a really fabulous outcome.
One quick follow-up point, James, if I may. You know, that we were talking about all these 54 plus projects, nature-based or however many in different locations. What that does is it demonstrates the state, the Commonwealth of Mass is actually putting money into local projects, which ultimately people get excited about. There's lots of benefits, co-benefits, that resilient triple bottom line. Local politicians get excited, and it creates this positive feedback loop in the governance structure to keep taking things off of that environmental bond a la carte every 5 years and putting it back into NBS related projects. I'm hoping that's the case, Steve. At least that's what I have in my mind is.
Absolutely. We brought a whole host of policymakers out to the Alewife Tea Station in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where a stormwater wetland has been built to help reduce risks and filter water. And the policymakers who went there had positive proof to go to their leadership and tout the benefits of nature-based solutions. And just this past year, we brought our House Speaker out to a living shoreline project we're doing in his community. And as somebody who had been very pro seawall, he saw a project that used nature-based infrastructure to keep the shoreline from eroding and maintain the beauty of a park. And just seeing the scales fall from his eyes and just the big smile on his face was worth every minute we spent getting him there.
It's awesome. So panelists, we are at 12:53, so we are reaching, unfortunately, the end of our time today. And as I think we might have expected, we have so many questions, and we could probably keep this conversation going for a couple more hours easily. I'm going to try to kind of shepherd us to the end here. And Steve, you mentioned you mentioned Alewife Park, and a really interesting question I think is worth touching on. And that's, what is the downside of having single communities applying for MVP planning when some projects are related to multiple communities? And the example that the questioner offers is the Alewife corridor that includes 5 or 6 towns. And I think this is something we think about in different ways all the time, but which one of you would like to maybe try to address that and keep our limited time frame in mind? Sarah.
Yeah, I'll give it a shot. So I forgot to mention when I was talking about principles of the program that regional approaches are a principle of the program. It's not required, but it's certainly allowed. And so what that means is that municipalities can plan as a region at the same time. We're also seeing municipalities choosing to regionalize after they've done their individual planning reports around a shared resource like surface drinking water. And we are also seeing municipalities choose to go together for regional action grants, including work actually up in the Mystic River watershed. The Regional Mystic Collaborative has 3 different working groups of different combinations of 17 municipalities looking at social impacts of climate change, how nature-based solutions can help the whole region avoid flooding impacts. So we're seeing regionalization happen in a lot of different ways.
Okay, great. Thank you, Sarah. So let's see. Question that's I think also really important to TNC. I mean, there are a couple of people are asking about how can we find out if communities in our state are involved, or how can we get people to get involved with CRB, and this is specifically outside of the Massachusetts context. So, how do folks advance CRB in their own communities? Adam or Steve?
Go, Steve.
Well, I think one of the things we're doing as the Nature Conservancy is showcasing the CRB process and the MVP program at national and state conferences And it's a really big diversity of conferences. Sometimes they're convened by federal or state agencies, engineering associations, municipal associations, landscape architects, conservation organizations that cover land and water issues. So we're really out there shouting from the mountaintop that this is a great program. Also doing a lot of consultations with different states. Adam and Sarah and I often get calls from different Nature Conservancy chapters or others, and they want us to walk them through it. And there's a transportation bill in Congress right now that has a program that looks at transportation infrastructure vulnerabilities that is, I don't know if it's loosely bottled after MVP or CRB, but there's definitely some seasoning in the secret sauce.
Related question, and I think unfortunately this will probably have to be the last one. There are a couple of questions about timelines. How long is it taking to get from the beginning of a CRB process or an MVP workshop process specifically to actually seeing something on the ground? One person mentioned that his community, Rockport, had completed the MVP, I think the initial workshops. So what is the timeline, and how do people find out if action is being taken? Sarah.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I'm struggling to come off mute. So the timeline for the planning can be fairly quick. You do some pre-work, you have your workshops, you get your report, you're certified. Then the timeline to action implementation can be more variable. So there are some communities where, like, for instance, we're working with Easton in southeastern Massachusetts, and we had already worked with them to prioritize potential wetlands for restoration to really help with flood abatement and water quality. So they already had a site that was prioritized that we'd done some field work on. And so that made it into their plan because they wanted to do flood abatement there. And so they're ready to start building that now with Action Grant funding. But for municipalities that might not have resilience projects in the pipeline, they may be taking actions that still are a build on to more planning and more assessment, so that they have a more robust understanding of their risk and their solution set. So there's a link that'll go out where you can check the status of your municipality. And now the program has regional coordinators, and we can send a link to the map with the regional coordinators as well. So I would think that would be a good place to start to find out who's on point in your municipality and learn what the process has been in terms of following up. And maybe they're doing action grants that just are less visible, and maybe they haven't applied yet. But that would be where I would start.
Hey, James, with regard to timing, I think the important thing is that it's happening, and we're living with the power and the promise of CRB right now. And we're really looking forward to making this even more of a hallmark of the Nature Conservancy. And it's only accomplished by working together. You're seeing 3-4 chapters here working together, and we're just looking to do more of that. And any help that anybody has, we'll accelerate that timing and get it into the hands of the people that need it the most, those on the front lines. And
Adam,
we're really thankful.
Adam, I am going to lie here and squeeze in one more question. I'm going to direct it to you. And I think it's a great kind of segue to end today's session. And that's, what about tapping into corporate social responsibility programs at local companies to support workshops and provide funding for implementation plans? I mean, it gets to the question of, going forward, how do we pay for this?
Yeah, well, we've demonstrated with the MVP program that states can make a huge difference if they relax and recognize that it's about municipalities. As we all indicated, one of the key components of all these workshops is the business, right? The economic side of things. And there's a growing understanding and recognition by businesses that you at least have to be perceived as being resilient. Sustainability was a word that's, we started back in the 80s, and it's become something now, and pretty much every corporation, large corporation, will have a sustainability officer. you know, we're not quite at the point where we have resilience officers in the corporate context, but certainly sustainability officers are taking on that role. They see the need to adapt their supply chains, make sure their customers are taken care of, make sure their employees are taken care of as critical pieces of their business in a climate changed world. So we have gotten a lot of interest from corporations through a variety of associations to kind of help them do a corporate CRB type of approach. And we have actually done some training in that regard with corporations. But there is some careful navigation that needs to happen being a nonprofit moving into that space, and it needs to be done deliberately and transparently. And but they're a critical part of our economy, and if we're not engaging with the corporate sector and only focusing on municipalities, then we're missing a big part of that. And obviously there's capital that goes along with that. That's a tough question, James. Thanks for that at the very end.
Well, you know, Adam, I always like to give you a challenge. You know, so
Can I talk about the power and the promise again? Sorry.
No, so folks, I apologize. We've gone a little bit over, and I would love to continue, but they say something like time waits on no one. So here we are at 1:02, and we are going to be sending out a follow-up. Apologies to everyone who asked a question that didn't get answered, or maybe didn't get answered specifically. Great engagement. We had a lot of folks on today's webinar. Please think about joining future Nature Connects webinars or Connecticut webinars, Nature Talks, and you can find that information on the respective state pages for the Nature Conservancy in Connecticut and Massachusetts. And you know, if you enjoy these webinars, tell your friends and family, and you know, we are really grateful to have the opportunity to talk to people who are really interested in TNC and our work, and who frankly make that work possible. So thank you for your support, which makes something like this happen. And with that, since we've run way over, I'm gonna have to let everyone go, and until next time.
Thank you, James.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Adam.